So obviously Walter Leger nor Cameron Henry were elected to be Speaker of the House.
No, they weren't. No.
So can you take us behind the scenes of that the night before inauguration? That
it was an interesting time, Tony, and I've written it in a journal because I don't want to forget it, and I don't want my children to forget it. I was of the belief that, or about a week before the inauguration, I was in total belief that Cameron Henry had the votes to get elected Speaker. Of course, the governor's office, till the very last minute, were pushing to get Walt Leger elected, and I believe they thought they had the votes. You have to remember we have two independent legislators as well. They're not a Republican or a Democrat. And so, but about a week before the inauguration, there was a meeting over in Baton Rouge, and you started kind of thinking that maybe Cameron had lost a few Republicans, and that there were some freshman legislators who had just got elected who were not sold on him. And I think they were being persuaded by the administration, and I think their excuse was, well, you know, Cameron, maybe his fiscal policies or whatever we can't agree with. We might could vote for another Republican, but we just can't vote for Cameron. And I think the governor took that as, or M. Walt Leger took that as, well, then you have no other choice than to vote for me. And so it looked like very much so the night before the inauguration that I was still hopeful, and of course I'm an eternal optimist and believe that we could get Cameron in. But it says a lot about Cameron Henry, because Cameron Henry was politically savvy enough, smart enough, and was enough of a leader to realize that he was running a risk of maybe us not being able to have an independent legislature, that maybe he couldn't win that speaker's race. And so what happened is that you know, the meeting broke up.
And it's a meeting of the Republican delegation.
Meeting of the Republican delegation, and there were 7 of us who stayed behind, kind of thinking about what we were going to do. And there was a plan developed that Cameron was going to, we were going to have an actual, and this is rarely ever happened to my understanding, but we were going to have a floor vote for Speaker where you had to announce who you were voting for. And so we had this problem with freshman elected legislators and didn't know what they were going to do, and they had pretty much said that they didn't think they could vote for Cameron. And it was enough of them to put us very close. Didn't know what would happen. So the thought process was that Taylor Barra, who's a good guy, a very good legislator, and
he's from New Iberia?
New Iberia, conservative, a good man, would get in the race. And that we were going to do what we need to do to get a Republican independent person elected. So the thought process was that we would have a floor vote, and then there would be enough votes for Cameron to put him in a runoff with Representative Leger. But we felt like that Representative Leger may beat Cameron in a runoff. But we felt like if the race was between Taylor Barra, who nobody had a problem with, because he essentially had not been really a candidate up to that point, that it would give some of the Republicans who had the excuse, I can't vote for Cameron because of these reasons. I want to vote for a Republican, but I can't vote for Cameron because of these reasons. Well, if it's a runoff between Taylor Barra and Walt Leger, they have an alternative than to vote for Taylor Barra because it's a record vote. And so what happened is that Cameron, there was a floor vote. The 2 top vote getters were Cameron Henry and Walt Leger. Then Cameron Henry did one of the most unselfish political things I've ever seen a candidate do, and he withdrew from the race. And under the rules of the House, then the next candidate goes into the runoff, who had got the votes, and that was Taylor Barra. So these Republicans who were on the fence had to cast their vote for Barra. Had it been Cameron and Leger, they probably would have went with Leger for those other reasons. They didn't have that reason anymore. And so it was shocking. I really didn't know if it was going to work. We all had our ones that we were going to talk to say, look, this is how, if this happens, this is what we're going to do. I was one of those people, and it was I tell you, it was minutes before the gavel hit that we were still negotiating and talking to people on the floor about this is what we're going to do and this is how it's going to work. And it did work.
So all of a sudden, Taylor Barra, the new Iberia representative, who probably had no idea that he was going to be elected speaker that day.
He may have knew that day, but he didn't know the day before.
He didn't know the day before.
Okay.
There are a lot of moving parts that run a legislature.
Right.
So you had to have a plan for who was going to do what, who was going to be the chairman of which committee. So he adopted a plan that the 7 of you had come up with before, or?
Well, not really a plan for that. It was really the members of that group were really, their main concern was having that independent legislature, that was independent of the executive branch, that could actually come to the table and negotiate and have, a stake in the game, which is the way the process is supposed to work. That was the number one concern. The rest of it was came way after that. And so as far as your committee chairman and things like that. And what happened was after Taylor won, he did an excellent job. I think he talked to every member of that legislature, both Republican and Democrat. And I think he made a short list. And I think definitely he took some advice from some people. But I think that, he then selected chairmen of committees. And I was, one of them, chairman of the Criminal Justice Committee, that was appointed that he thought could do the job, which is the way it's supposed to be, independent of the governor. I can tell you that I think he called every member of that legislature. I don't think he called the governor. Again, which is the way it's supposed to be. You have the legislative branch, you have the executive branch, and they're separate from each other. And you have to work together, and you each have a say, and you each bring something to the table. And so I was very proud of him, for doing that. I was happy that he selected me and as chairman of appropriations, a part of the leadership. But had he not, I would not have been sorry for my vote. I still think the right thing was done.
I just want to go back to the election one more time. Were there crossover votes? Were there Democrats that voted with a Republican over Leger, or Republicans that voted for Walt Leger over the?
There were Republicans that voted for Walt Leger. I don't think there was any Democrats that crossed over, but you got to remember the Republicans had a majority. And then we also, I take that back. No. Representative Abrams crossed over, who was a Democrat.
To vote for
Barra. And then we did have one of the independents, Representative Richard, that voted for Barra. And then in the second vote, the runoff, with those two, with the Republicans that we had enough to get Representative Barra elected. And so those two did cross over. But I don't believe there were any other Democrats that crossed over. But there were several Republicans that crossed over. I was very disappointed about that.